Hello, fifth graders, and welcome to your language arts lesson for today. For today, you will need your copy of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, as well as potentially paper or pencil. So if you need to go get those things, go do so, and then come on back. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, fifth graders, is talk about the answers to the homework. So, number one, what was Ichabod Crane's job? You should have picked teacher. Ichabod Crane was a teacher. 2, what is one quote that describes what Crane looked like? So you should have said one quote that describes what Crane looked like was. And then for number 3, another quote that describes what Crane looked like was or is. Lots of options. Some of you guys talked about his flat head, or his big ears, or his big eyes, or his long nose, or his huge feet, or his long legs, or that he's exceedingly lank, right? All of those are great quotes to describe. Some of you picked the quote about him looking like a scarecrow or looking like famine itself. All of those would have been exceptional quotes here. 4, it is said that Ichabod Crane scholars certainly were not spoiled. What does this mean? The correct answer is, this means that he used a rod to discipline his students. 5, of what was Ichabod Crane a perfect master? Ichabod Crane was a perfect master of Cotton Mather's History of New England Witchcraft was the correct answer. 6, how did Ichabod Crane ease his fears after reading his direful tales? The correct answer was that he eased his fears by singing to himself. And 7, what causes more perplexity to mortal man than ghosts, goblins, and the whole race of witches put together? I can't see where it is because it all got hidden. The correct answer was a woman. A woman causes more perplexity. Okay, so fifth graders, you can see our objective for today says that we're going to be predicting, the story's central problem. Okay, so as we look into today's homework, it's going to link to this objective of ours. And I'm going to switch to the viewer view because that's what cut off the answers last time. Okay, so number 1 asks, why was Katrina Van Tassel universally famed? In other words, what is she famous for? And I'll talk about this as we're reading. 2, what are Katrina's vast expectations? That's something else I'll talk about. Number 3, how did Ichabod Crane feel about Katrina? 4, why did Ichabod Crane's mouth water? 5, why was Abraham Van Brunt an interference to Ichabod Crane? 6, what was Abraham Van Brunt's nickname? I forgot to mention this. Remember, for the short answer, right, we would say Ichabod Crane felt blank about Katrina. And then we'd say Abraham Van Brunt's nickname was blank. 7, Brom Bones was known for his great knowledge and skill in what? 8, the neighbors assumed that Brom was at the bottom of any what? And then 9, related directly to our objective, what is the central problem of the story? By the time we finish this chapter or these pages, you should be comfortable in answering that, especially if you're working along with this video. So our answer, the central problem of the story is blank. Okay, so we're going to get into our reading. You may be noticing that for a lot of these answers for this particular text, we're directly answering, or we're taking direct quotes from the text to answer those questions. So if you're following along, you should be able to feel pretty confident about the answers that you're selecting for many of these, okay? So with that in mind, we are picking back up on page 18. As always, your eyes should be on the page with me, following along as I read. We're at the bottom of page 18, so. Among the musical disciples who assembled one evening in each week to receive his instructions in psalmody was Katrina Van Tassel, the daughter and only child of a substantial Dutch farmer. She was a blooming lass of fresh 18, plump as a partridge, ripe and melting and rosy-cheeked as one of her father's peaches, and universally famed, not merely for her beauty, but her vast expectations. So we see that, we learned earlier, right, that Ichabod teaches people to sing. That's one of his jobs. And one of these students that he teaches in singing is Katrina Van Tassel. And we learn that she's the only child of a farmer, and he's a substantial Dutch farmer, which is telling us that he has quite a large farm. He's quite successful as a farmer, has a lot of land, has a lot of probably wealth, okay? And so we get this question that to number one, this answer to question one, it tells us that she was universally famed not merely for her beauty, meaning not only because she's beautiful, but also because of her vast expectations. So you should feel pretty confident about the answer to number one based on what I just read. Okay. And so question two is asking, and this one, you can't find the answer in the text. We have to kind of think about this. What are her vast expectations? Vast is another word for large or great, a lot of something. And talking about her expectations, this is really referring to what did we just learn about her dad? What did we learn about her father? She's an only child, and her father has a large farm and a lot of wealth. So we kind of want to think about what would be true about an only child of a father who has a lot of wealth. Okay. So maybe you've heard of this idea of inheriting, right? And so this is how it works, right? That whatever wealth or material possessions that your parents have typically are going to be passed on to the child. And so when Katrina is not only beautiful, okay, but she also has these vast expectations. Great. In other words, she can expect to get a lot of something, is what this is getting at, that she can expect to get a lot of something. If her father has a large farm and is very wealthy, what can she expect to get a lot of? Her vast expectations are relating to this idea that she can expect to inherit land and wealth. And what does that mean for someone who would marry Katrina? They also could expect to get a lot of land and wealth. And so we're seeing that people know of Katrina in this area, not only because she's beautiful, but also because she's going to inherit a lot of money, right? So we can kind of see, and again, I've mentioned that this is an older story, but this is why they consider her to be a desirable future partner, right? She's beautiful and rich, right? And so we see that people are interested in her for that reason. Problematic, I think, right? Obviously not this idea of like marrying because you love someone or respect them, right? But this idea that she's beautiful and wealthy. Okay, she was, withal, a little of a coquette. I define that word coquette for you. It means that she's a little bit of a flirt, okay? A little bit of a flirt, which means that she's kind of anyone who expresses an interest in her romantically, she kind of gives them the idea that like she might like them too, right? So everybody gets the feeling like, oh, Katrina likes me. And someone else would say, no, she likes me. And no, she likes me, right? And so we see that she kind of gives everyone the feeling that she likes them romantically, okay? She was withal a little of a coquette, as might be perceived even in her dress, which was a mixture of ancient and modern fashions, as most suited to set off her charms. She wore ornaments of pure yellow gold, which her great-great-grandmother had brought over from Sardam, and the tempting stomacher of the olden time, and withal a provokingly short petticoat to display the prettiest foot and ankle in the country round. So again, we see that this is an older story, right? That she also flirts a little bit by showing people her foot and her ankle, right? So at this time, the dress would have gone usually all the way to the floor. So this is a little bit of an older book with different, I don't know, standards, I guess. Ichabod Crane had a soft and foolish heart towards the sex, meaning towards women. And it is not to be wondered at that so tempting a morsel soon found favor in his eyes, more especially after he had visited her in her paternal mansion. Found favor in his eyes. Found favor. What does that mean? If Katrina found favor in his eyes, what does that mean about her? How does he feel about her? Okay. If we were in school, I'd call on one of you, and someone would timidly say, he likes her. And I'd say, he likes her. What do you mean? And we go back and forth and back and forth, and eventually we'd all agree that he likes her, right? That means he likes her. There's like a romantic interest. And we get this added part of it that it tells us even more he likes her when he went to her dad's house and saw her dad's mansion. Okay. So she got us thinking about Ichabod a little bit, right? He loves this woman or is interested in her romantically, and the fact that he sees the mansion of her father makes him feel even stronger, more strongly about her. Very materialistic. Old Baltus Van Tassel was a perfect picture of a thriving, contented, liberal-hearted farmer. He seldom, it is true, sent either his eyes or his thoughts beyond the boundaries of his own farm. But within those, everything was snug, happy, and well-conditioned. He was satisfied with his wealth, but not proud of it, and piqued himself upon the hearty abundance, rather than the style in which he lived. His stronghold, meaning his home, was situated on the banks of the Hudson, in one of those green, sheltered, fertile nooks in which the Dutch farmers are so fond of nestling. A great elm spread its broad branches over it, at the foot of which bubbled up a spring of the softest and sweetest water, in a little well formed of a barrel, and then stole sparkling away through the grass to a neighboring brook that babbled along among alders and dwarf willows. Hard by the farmhouse was a vast barn. Again, that word vast meaning great, a huge barn that might have served for a church, every window and crevice of which seemed to be bursting forth with the treasures of the farm. The flail was busily resounding within it from morning to night. Swallows and martins skimmed twittering about the caves, and rows of pigeons, some with one eye turned up as if watching the weather, some with their heads under their wings or buried in their bosoms, and others swelling and cooing and bowing about their dames, were enjoying the sunshine on the roof. Sleek, unwieldy porkers were grunting in the repose and abundance of their pens, from whence sallied forth now and then troops of sucking pigs as if to snuff the air. A stately squadron of snowy geese were riding in an adjoining pond, convoying whole fleets of ducks. Regiments of turkeys were gobbling through the farmyard, and guinea fowls fretting about it like ill-tempered housewives, with their peevish, discontented cry. Before the barn door strutted the gallant cock, the pattern of a husband, a warrior and a fine gentleman, clapping his burnished wings and crowing in the pride and gladness of his heart, sometimes tearing up the earth with his feet, and then generously calling his ever-hungry family of wives and children to enjoy the rich morsel which he had discovered. So we're getting a little bit of what Ichabod sees when he visits this farm of Mr. Van Tassel, Herr Van Tassel. Herr is this Dutch word for Mr. Okay, so what we should be taking away from this last paragraph is that it's a really thriving, bustling farm, right? There's all kinds of animals. There's pigeons and there's roosters and chickens and pigs and all over the place, right? Geese. And so it's really a full, thriving farm, very successful, lots of animals, okay? So now we're going to be thinking about Ichabod Crane. Anytime we see pedagogue, that's referring to him. Pedagogue is another word for a teacher, so the teacher's mouth. The pedagogue's mouth watered as he looked upon this sumptuous promise of luxurious winter fare. Luxurious winter food meaning fare meaning food, okay, that he would eat in winter. In his devouring mind's eye, he pictured to himself every roasting pig running about with a pudding in his belly and an apple in his mouth. The pigeons were snugly put to bed in a comfortable pie and tucked in with a coverlet of crust. The geese were swimming in their own gravy, and the ducks pairing cozily in dishes like snug married couples, with a decent competency of onion sauce. In the porkers, he saw carved out the future sleek side of bacon and juicy, relishing ham. Not a turkey, but he beheld daintily trussed up with its gizzard under its wing, and peradventure a necklace of savory sausages. And even bright Chanticleer himself, Chanticleer is another word for a rooster, so even bright Chanticleer himself lay sprawling on his back in a side dish with uplifted claws, as if craving that quarter which his chivalrous spirit disdained to ask while living. In other words, that as Ichabod's looking at all these animals, he sees a pig and immediately imagines it's roasting with pudding and an apple or a side of bacon. He sees I'm trying to find the pigeons. And he imagines the pigeons being cooked in like a pie of a sort. He sees the geese swimming and he imagines them swimming in gravy. So he sees these animals and immediately starts imagining himself eating. Remember, we learned earlier, right? He has the appetite of an anaconda. He cannot eat enough. Okay. So he looks at these animals and imagines them as food that he could eat, and it makes his mouth water. Okay. As the enraptured Ichabod fancied all this, and as he rolled his great green eyes over the fat meadowlands, the rich fields of wheat, of rye, of buckwheat, and Indian corn, and the orchards burdened with ruddy fruit which surrounded the warm tenement of Van Tassel, his heart yearned after the damsel who was to inherit these domains, and his imagination expanded with the idea how they might be readily turned into cash and the money invested in immense tracts of wild land and shingle palaces in the wilderness. Nay, his busy fancy already realized his hopes and presented him to the blooming Katrina with a whole family of children mounted on the top of a wagon loaded with household trumpery, with pots and kettles dangling beneath, and he beheld himself bestriding a pacing mare with a colt at her heels, setting out for Kentucky, Tennessee, or the Lord knows where. So again, Ichabod teaches Katrina to sing. That is his relationship with her. But he visits the house and he imagines eating all the food. And he sees the home and the land and the animals and the wealth. And in his mind, he's already married her. They already have children together. They've already sold the land in order to make a lot of money and go move off and start a new life somewhere. So one might suggest that he's getting a little ahead of himself here, that he's imagining himself marrying a woman who currently his only relationship with is that he teaches her singing. Okay. It's also worth noting, why does he want to marry her? He says he loves her, but what it seems like is that he actually probably loves two other things even more. One of those things would be the wealth. Okay. The other part would be the food. The food. Ichabod loves the food. When he entered the house, the conquest of his heart was complete. In other words, when he saw what was in the house, he was done. Katrina was the only one for him. It was one of those spacious farmhouses with high ridged but lowly sloping roofs, built in the style handed down from the first Dutch settlers. The low projecting eaves forming a piazza along the front, capable of being closed up in bad weather. Under this were hung flails, harnesses, various utensils of husbandry, that's farming, and nets for fishing in the neighboring river. Benches were built along the sides for summer use, and a great spinning wheel at one end and a churn at the other showed the various uses to which this important porch might be devoted. From this piazza, the wandering Ichabod entered the hall, which formed the center of the mansion and the place of usual residence. Here, rows of resplendent pewter, ranged on a long dresser, dazzled his eyes. In one corner stood a huge bag of wool ready to be spun. In another, a quantity of linsey woolsey just from the loom. Ears of Indian corn and strings of dried apples and peaches hung in gay festoons along the walls, mingled with the god of red peppers. And a door left ajar gave him a peep into the best parlor, where the claw-footed chairs and dark mahogany tables shone like mirrors, and irons with their accompanying shovel and tongs glistened from their covert of asparagus tops. Mock oranges and conch shells decorated the mantelpiece. Strings of various colored birds' eggs were suspended above it. A great ostrich egg was hung from the center of the room, and a corner cupboard, knowingly left open, displayed immense treasures of old silver and well mended china. So, what should that paragraph tell us about the Van Tassels? As we're hearing about pewter and china and glass ornaments and mahogany. So our takeaway should be that it's very luxurious in that home, which again goes with this idea that they have wealth. They have great wealth, and you can kind of see it in the way that their home is decorated. Remember the beginning of the paragraph. Ichabod sees all this wealth, and it says he's done, right? His conquest is complete, meaning his heart is gone. He loves Katrina once he sees the house. Again, does he love her? Does he love her money? It's an important question. From the moment Ichabod laid his eyes upon these regions of delight, the peace of his mind was at an end, and his only study was how to gain the affections of the peerless daughter of Van Tassel. In other words, now he's seen this, he's determined to figure out how to win her heart. In this enterprise, however, he had more real difficulties than generally fell to the lot of a knight errant of yore, who seldom had anything but giants, enchanters, fiery dragons, and such like easily conquered adversaries to contend with, and had to make his way merely through great gates of iron and brass and walls of adamant to the castle keep, where the lady of his heart was confined, all of which he achieved easily, as a man would carve his way to the center of a Christmas pie, and then the lady gave him her hand as a matter of course. So he's saying, knights of yore having to go through dragons and iron castles and all that, that was easy compared to what Ichabod had to do. Ichabod, on the contrary, had to win his way to the heart of a country coquette, beset with a labyrinth of whims and caprices which were forever presenting new difficulties and impediments, and he had to encounter a host of fearful adversaries of real flesh and blood, the numerous rustic admirers, who beset every portal to her heart, keeping a watchful and angry eye upon each other, but ready to fly out in the common cause against any new competitor. In other words, there's a lot of people who have seen Katrina and the wealth that would come with Katrina and find her to be a very desirable partner. So while Ichabod thinks, I must figure out a way to get her to marry me, many, many other people are also thinking that very same thing, okay? He's not the only one. Among these competitors, people competing for Katrina, the most formidable, the hardest one to overcome, was a burly, roaring, roistering blade of the name of Abraham, or according to the Dutch abbreviation, Brom van Brunt, the hero of the country round, which rang with his feats of strength and hardihood. He was broad-shouldered and double-jointed, with short curly black hair and a bluff but not unpleasant countenance, having a mingled air of fun and arrogance. From his Herculean frame, Hercules, that should connect with you. Okay, so he's very big. From his Herculean frame and great powers of limb, he had received the nickname of Brom Bones, by which he was universally known. So we've actually talked about 5 and 6 already. He was famed for great knowledge and skill in horsemanship, being as dexterous on horseback as a Tartar, and 7 now. He was foremost at all races and cockfights, and with the ascendancy which bodily strength always acquires in rustic life, was the umpire in all disputes, setting his hat on one side and giving his decisions with an air and tone that admitted no gainsay or appeal. He was always ready for either a fight or a frolic, always ready to fight or kind of prank around, or go through some sort of like pranks is probably the best word, but had more mischief than ill will in his composition. And with all his overbearing roughness, there was a strong dash of waggish good humor at the bottom. He had 3 or 4 boon companions, these are his best friends, who regarded him as their model, and at the head of whom he scoured the country, attending every scene or feud of merriment for miles around. In cold weather he was distinguished by a fur cap, surmounted with a flaunting fox's tail. And when the folks at a country gathering descried this well-known crest at a distance, whisking about among a squad of hard riders, they always stood by for a squall. Sometimes his crew would be heard dashing along past the farmhouses at midnight with a whoop and a halloo, like a troop of Don Cossacks. And the old dames, startled out of their sleep, would listen for a moment till the hurry-scurry had clattered by, and then exclaim, "Aye, there goes Brom Bones and his gang." The neighbors looked upon him with a mixture of awe, admiration, and goodwill. And when any madcap prank, or rustic brawl being like a fight, occurred in the vicinity, always shook their heads and warranted Brom Bones was at the bottom of it. Number 8 as well. So we meet this character, Brom Bones, which in terms of like physical description is probably the exact opposite of Ichabod Crane, right? Ichabod's kind of very tall, very skinny, lank and kind of awkwardly, loosely hung together, right? Versus Brom, who is this big, muscular, strong, very athletic character. And we see, in general, they like him in their area, in this village, right? He's definitely into pranks. He's definitely into fights. There's always kind of things that are happening. Whenever you see him and his gang of friends riding along, they always assume that there's going to be some kind of like upheaval happening, but it's not. People aren't really angry about him. They mostly are like, oh, there goes Brom again. They sort of expect that there's going to be some pranking and some nonsense happening when he's around. Okay, and we also learned that he's a really great horseback rider, like exceptional horseback rider. Everybody knows him for how much he is into horseback riding. So some things we learn, right? Horseback riding, pranking, fighting are kind of things that he's about. Okay. This rantable hero had for some time singled out the blooming Katrina for the object of his uncouth gallantries. And though his amorous toyings were something like the gentle caresses and endearments of a bear, yet it was whispered that she did not altogether discourage his hopes. So we learn that Brahm is also pursuing Katrina as a person of interest. Okay. So Ichabod wants to woo, love, be with Katrina, and we see that Brahm has also expressed that interest in her. Okay. And we learn they compare his love to like getting a hug from a bear. So that Brahm maybe isn't very good at being romantic and wooing her, but it also is kind of whispered around that she hasn't shut him down. She's kind of like still maybe interested in Brahm. Okay. So I repeat, right? We have this idea of this like Ichabod has expressed that he, or at least the narrator has expressed to us that Ichabod would like to marry Katrina. In fact, in his mind, has done so, right? He's already married her and they've moved off and have children together. And we meet this other character who's kind of the exact opposite of Ichabod and who likes pranks and fights, and he also has interest. Okay. Certain it is his advances were signals for rival candidates to retire, who felt no inclination to cross a lion in his amers. Insomuch that when Brahm's horse was seen tied to Van Tassel's paling on a Sunday night, a sure sign that his master was courting, or as it was termed, sparking within, all other suitors passed by in despair, and carried the war into other quarters. So it's pretty accepted that when Brahm is trying to visit with Katrina and woo her, everyone else should move on. Okay? Stop it. Such was the formidable rival with whom Ichabod Crane had to contend. And considering all things, a stouter man than he would have shrunk from the competition, and a wiser man would have despaired. He, Ichabod, had, however, a happy mixture of pliability and perseverance in his nature. He was in form and spirit like a supple jack, yielding but tough. Though he bent, he never broke, and though he bowed beneath the slightest pressure, yet the moment it was a white jerk, he was erect and carried his head as high as ever. In other words, other guys have kind of stopped trying with Katrina because Brahm is so threatening. However, Ichabod is not like that, right? He just keeps pursuing her. And even if some pressure comes to him, he still kind of bounces back and is still optimistic. Okay, one more paragraph, fifth graders. To have taken the field openly against his rival would have been madness. It would have been a poor choice to openly try and compete with Brom Bones. For he was not a man to be thwarted in his amors, any more than that stormy lover Achilles. Ichabod therefore made his advances in a quiet, gently insinuating manner. Under cover of his character of singing master, he made frequent visits at the farmhouse. Not that he had anything to apprehend from the meddlesome interference of parents, which is so often a stumbling block in the path of lovers. Bald Van Tassel was an easy, indulgent soul. He loved his daughter better even than his pipe, and like a reasonable man and an excellent father, let her have her way in everything. His notable little wife, too, had enough to do to attend to her housekeeping and manage her poultry. For as she sagely observed, ducks and geese are foolish things and must be looked after, but girls can take care of themselves. Thus, while the busy dame bustled about the house or plied her spinning wheel at one end of the piazza, honest Bolt would sit smoking his evening pipe at the other, watching the achievement of a little wooden warrior, who, armed with a sword in each hand, was most valiantly fighting the wind on the pinnacle of the barn. In the meantime, Ichabod would carry on his suit with the daughter by the side of the spring under the great elm, or sauntering along in the twilight, at hour so favorable to the lover's eloquence. So we see in the end that Ichabod's not really like openly competing with Brahm. He's not like fighting him or trying to, declare anything. Instead, he just makes a lot of visits to teach her in singing. And his goal in the end is to try and woo her, win her heart when he comes to teach her about singing. Okay. So I've given kind of some big hints about this idea of predicting the story's central problem. What is the driving, when I say central problem, right? What is driving the action of our story? So we have these characters and they're kind of looping together in what we would call like a triangle. And this is what's related to our central problem of the story. So I'm curious to see how you put this into your own words, fifth graders. And I've given cues throughout the video about where to find answers to your questions. So hopefully you're feeling confident about your homework. Good luck.